À-bas-le-ciel.
But if you asked, why do I put so much time and effort into YouTube, YouNow, etc., the main point, in a sense, is not activism. It's having other people to do activism with. It's these political aspirations for the future of the vegan movement. Most of them I can't do alone. And some of them, even if I could do it alone, I wouldn't want to do it alone. So I'm a middle-aged person. I'm 39 years old. The hardest people to galvanize and organize politically are other middle-aged people, right? Why? They have a full-time job. They have kids. They have other priorities. It's when you're not committed to one job, one place, one schedule, that it's possible for you to reach out to other people and organize something, anything, in terms of vegan activism or any form of activism. YouTube and social media and the internet generally, that first step of getting to know each other and testing how much you can trust or cooperate with each other, that's facilitated to an unbelievable extent in the digital era in the 21st century. As opposed to the leap of faith somebody would have had to take in the 1960s, they're handed a pamphlet that says, hey, join the peace movement. Join this group. We're protesting for peace. We're activists for peace. We're going to City Hall, Parliament, or the Senate for peace. Sometimes peace really means communism. Sometimes peace means, black rights extremist group that engages in, illegal and violent activity that you don't want to be involved in. You want to be with a non-violent group, not a violent group, whatever it may be. To move past the pamphlet, to know who is behind the pamphlet, the good and the bad of them. Their beliefs, their modus operandi, what they do and don't do. Very, very difficult to do just a few decades ago, and now it's incredibly easy. The fact that I'm at a point in my life where I can work on something, anything. This person writing to me sees that as a weakness. I've got to point out in response, no, it's a strength. We have this saying in English, you got to strike while the iron's hot. It's the exact opposite with politics. You've got to learn to make the most of the opportunity that's there when the iron is cold.
À-bas-le-ciel.
Hey guys, what's up? This is a response to an email I got from an ex-Patreon supporter. It's not the first email in that discussion. For me, it raises a bunch of interesting issues about activism and slacktivism. And as some of you already know, I've just returned to Canada after about 2 years in China. I think it fell a little bit short of 2 years in total. And, I'm wanting to get back into real-world activism. I'm wanting to have real collaborations with real people in real life who go to City Hall and go to Parliament and lobby for legal reform and go to the school boards and complain to the school boards that they're teaching children that eating eggs are healthy and eating eggs is not healthy, and all kinds of productive, hands-on, democratic, transparent, nonviolent activism, working within the constraints of living in a modern, Western, democratic, capitalist, bourgeois society. I could go on. I got these kinds of aspirations, but ultimately, my aspiration is not to do any of these things alone. It's to do it with other people. And that is one of the main reasons why I came on YouTube in the first place, and one of the reasons why I stuck with YouTube in the first place. I have other reasons to be on YouTube, I don't need to talk about here, but including the fact that I have a daughter who lives in France. I only see her now twice a year. Leaving a record of the kind of person I am and my political and philosophical views for my daughter in the future, that's also a meaningful reason to be on YouTube. But if you asked, why do I put so much time and effort into YouTube, YouNow, etc., the main point, in a sense, is not activism. It's having other people to do activism with. It's these political aspirations for the future of the vegan movement. Most of them I can't do alone. And some of them, even if I could do it alone, I wouldn't want to do it alone. Let me ask you this, as lame as it is to do street protests, who wants to get out and protest on the street as just one man? I have seen, sorry, by the way, my girlfriend's in the background here off camera, but I have actually attended some moving one-man protests. Once in a while you see that one guy standing there on the street and he's protesting because his own son died in the Iraq War or something like this. Once in a while you see that kind of thing. But most forms of activism certainly involve a quorum of interested people who can contribute to the cause, even if it's just for them to engage in the discussions on the internet that lead up to the event itself. So to give an example, I've been floating this idea lately of doing a conference in Vancouver. And I mean, what's the minimum number of participants you need to make a conference like that happen? And there are economic aspects to that puzzle too. People ultimately have to buy airplane tickets and have to stay in a hotel. And even if everyone is paying for their own airplane tickets and hotel, they need to be assured that this is worth their time and money to come and participate in this conference. So there's a lot to it. Look, here's the email I just got. I may sort of skip over some parts, but you'll see. I think probably almost every sentence of this short email I do want to reply to. There's an email from an ex-Patreon supporter. She writes, you said it yourself, YouTube isn't the place to do what you want to do. I think YouTube was never the place and never will be. This was the problem from day one, in my opinion. That's her writing to me. So that is 180 degrees the opposite of my view. She is going on to argue that what's really important is having collaborations with people or meeting people or working with other activists that you meet face-to-face in real life. And I think that is BS. I think that is bullshit in the parlance of our time. I think it is nonsense. I think she's not being honest with herself, and she's not being honest and reflecting on her own experience. Like, one of the most overrated locales, or the most overrated milieu for political activism has got to be the university campus. I've spent so much of my life on university campuses in the last 5 years, in the last 15 years. Who do you think you're going to meet on a university campus? How are you going to meet them? I mean, even if you are on a university campus every day, as I was when I was at University of Victoria, when I was at First Nations University, when I was at University of Toronto, when I was at Cambridge and Oxford, England, the fact that you're standing on a university campus does not mean you're going to make the connections to do real-life activism, to get organized. If you have a YouTube channel that explains to people what you're about, shows them what kind of person you are, your approach to activism, all the political and philosophical assumptions and underpinnings for your approach, then you really can meet up with people, whether they're on a campus or whether they have a full-time job or whatever their situation may be. But the idea that real life, the theater of real life, or the theater of a university campus or something, is a great place to get organized with like-minded people, I think is dead wrong. I think YouTube absolutely is the perfect place for me to be doing what I'm trying to do here, because, again, what I'm trying to do is meet other people I can do it with. No, ultimately, what I want to do in real life is not on the internet. It's in real life, but how do you get together that group of people, whether it's 5 or 10 people? And, so looking at YouTube as a recruiting tool, as a rallying tool, as a crossroads, and not just a crossroads, because let's face it, I've made this comparison before. If you pick up a pamphlet, and the pamphlet is trying to do the same thing that I'm doing here on YouTube, like, hey, let's get organized, how much do you know about the person who wrote that pamphlet? Politically, personally, morally, ethically, and otherwise. Do you have the trust, if you just read a pamphlet, do you have the trust to subscribe to Patreon and pay that person $1 a month to support them publishing more pamphlets? Probably not. I have almost 900 videos on YouTube now. We're way past 800. Apart from my YouTube videos, you can read articles I've written. You can interact with me in various ways. You can talk to me, of course. You can talk to me on Skype or, via Patreon or what have you. It's quite easy and low risk and low effort for someone who might want to collaborate with me in a political project to get to know my political views, the good and the bad of them. I mean, I'm not saying it's all good. A lot of people may learn about my political views and decide they don't want to work with me, and that's fine. That's cool, and vice versa. I might find that out about you. I might find that out about them. But YouTube and social media and the internet generally, that first step of getting to know each other and testing how much you can trust or cooperate with each other, that's facilitated to an unbelievable extent in the digital era in the 21st century. As opposed to the leap of faith somebody would have had to take in the 1960s, they're handed a pamphlet that says, hey, join the peace movement. Join this group. We're protesting for peace. We're activists for peace. We're going to City Hall, Parliament, or the Senate for peace. Sometimes peace really means communism. Sometimes peace means, black rights extremist group that engages in, illegal and violent activity that you don't want to be involved in. You want to be with a nonviolent group, not a violent group, whatever it may be. you know, to move past the pamphlet, to know who is behind the pamphlet, the good and the bad of them. You know, their beliefs, their modus operandi, what they do and don't do. Very, very difficult to do just a few decades ago, and now it's incredibly easy. So I think YouTube is absolutely the right place for me to be. And I can also say I get much better results on YouTube than I do writing essays in text form and posting them on the internet. Maybe the world would be a better place if that were not so. Maybe the world would be a better place if long-form essays were the medium of communication, but they're not. So within the English language, at least, this is the way to do it. It might be very different if you spoke a language with a small number of speakers like Slovenian, but frankly, I doubt it. Probably, I think, you know, even for a small language like Slovenian, probably the YouTube scene is really hopping within that language, and you can be the one person representing vegan politics in Slovenia. Right. So anyway, I continue to read this letter. As I said before, so quote, as I said before, I think you need to stay in one place for a few years. If you continue to move around, nothing will ever be created, especially not a bricks and mortar institution like you wanted. So, look, I'm disagreeing here with what I think she's saying in principle. What she's saying in principle is you need to settle down and get roots in one place. She a little bit later in the email, she says that in other terms. I'm not putting words into her mouth so much. Like, you need to settle down, have a home and a job and a basis in one place in the real world before you start to do what you're trying to do here on YouTube. That is the exact opposite of the truth, right? And I deal with those times. So I'm a middle-aged person. I'm 39 years old. The hardest people to galvanize and organize politically are other middle-aged people, right? Why? They have a full-time job. They have kids. They have other priorities. Yeah? And that's why, I mean, activism, stereotypically and actually, tends to gravitate towards high school students and college students on one side and retired people on the other side. Historically, a lot of movements that we remember as being populated by young, vital people really weren't. The reality of the anti-war movements and peace movements of the whole 20th century was actually much more elderly people than you might want to think it was. For example, during the 1960s and 1970s, elderly people who could remember World War I were really the core of the peace movement, the anti-war movement. The experience of living through World War I is quite a bit different than growing up, say, after World War II, the perspective on war and its consequences. So you can imagine. But, of course, by the 1970s, people who could remember World War I were truly into their retirement years. They were at the end of their life cycle. So this is much often overlooked, whether you're talking about the history of feminism or the history of the gay rights movement or anti-war movements. We tend to like to portray them with selected photographs, you know, from protests or rallies of young people, often half-naked young people. I mean, if you just do a Google Images search for any of those protest movements now, including the gay rights movement, you often get, you know, guys at these protests with body paint on and wearing revealing attire, and you omit entirely the importance of elderly and retired people. But the hardest people to organize are the people in the middle of that age spectrum, right? And I think you have to look at, I mean, for me, I have to look at this time in my life, and I'm encouraging other people watching this video to look at this time in your life as an opportunity in exactly this way. It's when you're not committed to one job, one place, one schedule, that it's possible for you to reach out to other people and organize something, anything, in terms of vegan activism or any form of activism, right? And I want to put a little bit of emphasis on the something, anything. Guys, I don't need to be a leader. I'd be happy to be a joiner. I'd be happy to join up with somebody else's movement, somebody else's activity that they've already got the impetus rolling for. But there is nothing for me to join up to. You know, I can't join Direct Action Everywhere. For one thing, I think their movement is dying. I've just recently been interviewing and talking to people who are deeply involved with Direct Action Everywhere. I might have another video like that coming up. There's one more woman who wants to talk to me, actually, with some of the economic details, the budget and where it goes, where the money comes from, where it goes for DXE, which is a very interesting topic, and it's something all political movements have to worry about, where the money comes from, where it goes. But it's not the case that I live in an era or a context where I can easily join up with someone else's movement, but I'd be happy to do so. At this phase of my life, exactly the fact that I have this flexibility, that I can move from place to place, that I could join someone else's movement, that I can change what I'm doing to reflect the interests of the other people in my life. So in the past, one of my interests is lobbying school boards, the education system. And back when I thought I could collaborate with Tofu Goddess, when I talked to her about activism, I put emphasis on that. I said, look, one of the things I really want to do with veganism is put together an outfit that lobbies school boards. And you go from town to town within Canada. You could give basically the same speech, the same presentation from one school board to the next, where you look at what school boards are teaching children about education, and you challenge their assumptions about milk and eggs, meat too, of course, to some extent. But milk and eggs are probably the really strong suit in terms of the vegan argument. And you challenge the extent to which donations from the dairy board and the egg board, and even like museum exhibits, by the way, that are put together by dairy boards. You can see some of these things are really crazy. Big budget events. So as they have like a truck that brings a cow to the school, and they set up a museum exhibit. There's no other term for it, to tell children how wonderful dairy farming supposedly is, and so on. To challenge those things and say, look, why do you take money from the dairy board and the egg board, but you don't take it from Coca-Cola, you don't take it from Pepsi, you don't take it from the cigarette companies, you don't take it from the whiskey or the beer companies? This actually is in the same. I would love to press that fight forward. I'd love to have a couple other people in Canada I can form a coalition with, actually incorporate an NGO or agency with. But my point is, even though that is one of my interests, one of the reasons why I was putting emphasis on it in the past was because I knew one other person with a Canadian passport, with Canadian citizenship, who had that interest in common. It's like, okay, so I can build on that because that's the common ground I've got with at least one other person. Now I need 5 or 10 people to really move forward with that, and I don't have that. And Tofu Goddess apparently has now banned this channel because at some point I said something too offensive about some topic she cares about. I don't even know what. She hasn't explained it to me. So I've lost that one person who might have started the ball rolling, right? The fact that I'm at a point in my life where I can work on something, anything. This person writing to me sees that as a weakness. I've got to point out in response, no, it's a strength. And that is when new ideas can take hold. That's when you as an individual are open to new ideas and new forms of activism. And for me, it is right now. For you watching this video, if it's right now also, hit me up, get in touch with me. Especially if you're a Canadian citizen, if you're in Germany or France or Slovenia, maybe you can just commiserate. But I want to know you. And again, that's fundamentally why I'm on YouTube. Quote, I do not know how DXE was created. I can only speak for France. France's most known association, or most successful association at the moment, is called L214. It started with just 3 people writing articles about animal rights and publishing them on the internet, etc., etc. Volunteers joined, they started recording videos in Slaughterhouse, the mainstream media started to talk about it, and now it's, to some extent, a real organization in real life and so on. Right. So, part of the positive message there is exactly that it starts with 3 people, right? But it is 3 people precisely with the kind of flexibility in their lives, even if it's the flexibility to just say, oh, you're in Los Angeles? I can go meet you in Los Angeles, within France. Oh, you're in Perpignan? I can go meet you in Perpignan. I'm in Paris, you're in Perpignan, but let's make this work. You do need, you're talking about 3 people, but it's quite likely 3 unemployed people or 3 people who somehow are at a crossroads in their life where they can set aside their other responsibilities and take on this new challenge, right? I have a window of opportunity right now, and it's closing, although it's closing in a positive way. We have signed up to go to a school for cuisine to learn how to bake. So I say we, me and my girlfriend together. We're going to learn how to bake bread. We're going to learn how to bake cake. We're going to learn how to make pastries. Why am I doing this? For the future of the vegan movement. Because I'm interested in vegan baking, vegan food services as a way of forming a basis for activism, and in a sense, as something that is a kind of activism or advocacy in itself, right? If I were not vegan, I would not be enrolled in these courses for baking. It is, for me, really linked to the politics, the ethics, the ecology, above all else. And I feel like bread and pastry is actually a way I can move forward with that. But guess what? As soon as those classes start, I'm busy 12 hours a day, 5 days a week. Minimum. I'm going to be busy as hell with that baking college. And I'm probably going to love every minute of it. Being busy is not a bad thing in my book, right? So be honest with yourself about your commitments as a middle-aged person, or if you're watching this as a young person looking forward to middle age. We have this saying in English, you got to strike while the iron's hot. It's the exact opposite with politics. You've got to learn to make the most of the opportunity that's there when the iron is cold.
À-bas-le-ciel.